This is the key to factoring worksheet number 7. And really, in these problems, you want to solve each of these quadratic equations, and you want to solve each of those quadratic equations by factoring. Okay, so let's look at number 1. So number 1, we have 3x times 2x plus 5 is equal to 0. So I want you to notice that number 1, it's already factored. If you were to get rid of the parentheses distribute, you get a quadratic equation. But remember, the first step in solving a quadratic equation is to factor. Well, number 1's already factored. So since it's already factored, I want you to notice something. You have this monomial factors here, 3x times 2x plus 5, see, times 2x plus 5 equals 0. So remember, the zero factor property is what you're going to be using now. Zero factor property. And so the zero factor property says if you have two or more factors whose product is 0, then one of those factors has to be 0. So you see I have 3x and I have 2x plus 5. And so that product is 0. So according to the zero factor property, either 3x must equal 0 or 2x plus 5 must be 0. And so now you're going to solve each of those linear equations. This one, to get x by itself, you can divide both sides by 3. And so you get x to be 0. So there's one of your solutions. Over here, you're going to subtract 5 from both sides. And so you get 2x equal negative 5. Divide both sides by 2. And so you get negative 5 halves. So those are the solutions to number 1. Number 2, you have 25n squared minus 9 equals 0. All right, now remember the direction said factor, so you must factor. You must use factoring. What you have to do is recognize that this is the difference of two squares. So it's not factored yet. That's the difference of two squares. And by the way, remember in factoring, you must look for GCF first. So the GCF here of both terms is 1. But it is the difference of two squares, so I'm going to factor it as, don't forget you must say equals 0. 5n minus 3, 5n plus 3 equals 0. You have to have that equal 0 because this is an equation. Your statement must be mathematically correct. Now we can use the zero factor property because I have two factors whose product is 0. So one of those, I'm going to set each one equal to 0. One of those must be 0. So 5n minus 3 equals 0. 5n plus 3 equals 0. And then we just solve each of those linear equations. So I went from a quadratic equation to two linear equations. So here 5n equals 3. Divide both sides by 5. I get n to be 3/5. Over here, subtract 3 from both sides. I get 5n equals negative 3. Divide both sides by 5. I get n to be a negative 3/5. So those are your two solutions. All right, number 3, we have 3d squared plus 8d equal 3. All right, so what you got to do first, remember, in order to use the zero factor property, you have to have 0 on the other side. So you got to put this in standard form, meaning you got to bring this 3 to the other side. So I get 3d squared plus 8d minus 3 equals 0, and put in descending order. The GCF is 1, so I can go directly to factoring. And so when I factor this, and don't forget you must say equals 0, all of those are equations. And so when you factor this, let's see, 3d for negative 3, let's go ahead and make this a positive 3 and a negative 1. So that looks like it's going to work. Now always check. Don't assume what you wrote is correct. 3d times d is 3d squared. A negative 1 times a positive 3 is a negative 3. Now let's make sure I get that positive 8d. The outer is 9d. The inner is a negative 1d. When I add them up, I get 8d. All right, so what I did factor this correctly. So now we're going to use the zero factor property. So I'm going to set each of those equal to 0. So I get 3d minus 1 equals 0. D plus 3 equals 0. And it's just a matter of you solving each of those linear equations. So adding 1 to both sides, I get 3d equals 1. Divide both sides by 3. One of my solutions is 1/3. Over here, subtract 3 from both sides. I get d to be a negative 3. So those are your two solutions. Number 4. All right, number 4, we have 8y squared equals a negative 72y. All right, so again, in order to use the zero factor property, because you do want to solve these equations by factoring, So if I'm going to solve by factoring, then at some point I'm going to use a zero factor property. So I have to have 0 on the other side. So I got to bring the 72y to the other side. So this becomes 8y squared plus 72y equals 0. All right, I want you to notice that this is this is a binomial. It's two terms. All right, so since it's two terms, make sure, and even if it wasn't two terms, remember it did say, what's the GCF? The GCF here is 1. So always look for GCF. So here, the GCF looks like it's 8y. So I can factor out an 8y. So I get 8y times, and let's see, so oops, it's not 8y, sorry. That's, 72. Yep, okay, it's 8y. So I get 8y times y is 8y squared plus 8y times 9 is 72y equals 0. And now that looks like number 1, where we had this. Okay? So now I have really it's 3 factors, 8y and y plus 9, but I'm going to put 8y together. So 8y times y plus 9 equals 0. So I'm going to set each of those equal to 0. Looks very similar to number 1. And so to get 8y, to get y by itself, and divide both sides by 8. So you must say, though, 0 divided by 8 is 0. So there's one of your solutions. Over here, subtract 9 from both sides. I get y to be negative 9. So those are your two solutions for number 4. Number 5, I have 35m squared plus 23m minus 6 equals 0. So the GCF is 1. It's already in standard form. I have 0 on the other side. So let's go directly to the two binomials. So for 35m, let's try 7m and 5m. Okay? And for 6, let's try 3 and 2. And let's see which one's going to work. It looks like it may be, let's see. Let's just try something. Let's put 3 here, 2 there, see if it works. So I'm going to go off to the side and figure this out. 7m, 5m, 2, and 3. And that's not going to work because no matter where you put the negative and the positive, you're not going to get that 23m. So let's try this instead. So that didn't work. So let's try 7m, 5m. This time, let's put the 6 here, and let's put the 1 here. So we're going to try 6 and 1. And let's see, that's a 30, and that's a 7. Okay, so that's going to work. So this is going to be the positive, this is going to be the negative right here. So let's check it. 7m times 5m is 35m squared. A positive 6 times a negative 1 is a negative 6. The outer is a negative 7m. The inner is a positive 30m. I'm going to add them up. I get 23m. Okay? All right, so don't forget, you must say equal 0. Now we're going to set each of those factors equal to 0, so we're using a zero factor property. So I get 7m plus 6 equals 0. 5m minus 1 equals 0. And so to solve each of those linear equations, I'm going to subtract 6 from each side here. So I get 7m equal negative 6. Divide both sides by 7. I get m to be negative 6/7. So there's one of your solutions. Over here, add 1 to both sides. I get 5m equal 1. Divide both sides by 5. I get m to be 1/5. Okay, so that's number 5. And then finally, number 6, you have 5x squared minus 44x minus 9 equals 0. So the GCF is 1, so I'm going to go directly to the two binomials. And the only possibility for 5x is 5x and x. 5x squared is 5x and x. And let's see, let's put the 9 here. So 9 and 1 is going to work, not 3 and 3. So we put the 9 here, the 1 here. And I want you to notice, see how I need negative 44? And the last sign is negative, right? So these are different. The sign's going to be different. So the outer is a 45 and the inner is a 1. So when I subtract them, I do get 44. But I need the 45 to be negative. The larger of those to be negative. So this will be the negative, this will be the positive. And let's check it. 5x times x is 5x squared. A positive 1 times a negative 9 is a negative 9. The outer is a negative 45x. The inner is a positive 1x. And when I add them up, I get negative 44x. So what I have is correct. Make sure you say 0. Now, you're going to use a zero factor property. So you have to say 5x plus 1 equals 0. You got to say equals 0. X minus 9 equals 0. And then you solve each of those linear equations. And so subtract 1 from both sides. You get 5x to be negative 1. Divide both sides by 5. And you get x to be negative 1/5. So there's one of your solutions. Your other one, you add 9 to both sides and you found the other. So the other is positive 9. So those are your two solutions. So that is the, the key to solving quadratic equations by factoring. That's the factoring number 7.